The other new major feature that has been added to EDIUS is motion tracking. So suppose I want to do something like this. I want to take these two guys' faces and blot them out. Now I've always been able to do that through the mask filter in EDIUS, but as these guys move, I've always had to do all the movements manually. Now we've got motion tracking, which means EDIUS does most of the work. Now you can see here I've actually done one, and what I'm going to do is take that off and do it again. So I'm just going to grab the mask and dump it on top. The motion tracking currently is only in the mask filter. They have said that in later versions, after 8.2, they will expand it so you can actually track objects and take titles and maybe stick them onto various things. Right now it's only in the mask filter. Put the mask filter on, double click on it. I will then draw a box over my head, or a circle I should say, because I want to blot out my head. Now once I've drawn out the mask, I'm just going to turn on filter and choose a filter. I'm going to put on a mosaic, so in the search box I'm just going to say mosaic and choose that filter. You can see there now the mosaic has been applied to my head. You never see the results in the mask filter, but you do see the results out there on the final video. So there, I've got a mask on my head, but my head wobbles around a bit. So I want that mask to follow it. Up to now I would have had to turn on keyframing and then go through and manually change it. But now I can get EDIUS to track it for me. Now the tracker is down here on the timeline. So I'm going to turn all that lot off. That's back to how we started. I'm just going to go through this and look for the heading that says tracking. It's under shape. I've only got one shape at the moment, which is my head. I'll add another one in a second. And I'm just going to click on this to turn on tracking. And then you have these little things here. You can either track forwards and track backwards. Now with this thing I'm just going to start here and track all the way through. I'll explain why you might want to track backwards in a minute. You've got a couple of ones there for tracking backwards and a couple of buttons there for tracking forwards. So one of them just tracks forward one frame at a time. The other one plays the whole thing and tries to do it live. Ideally that's the one you're going to use. You're going to click on that and then just let it work it out, which is what I'll do in a second. In the middle you have a little dot. Click on that and you get the options for what you're going to track. So obviously here you've got the option to do position, scale and rotation. So in other words, if somebody's coming towards you, you need to do the scale as well as the position, because they'll move around and they'll get bigger. Rotation you might need because, like in my case, my head is going to rotate. Now most of the time I leave all those on and then turn them off if it doesn't work properly. All really I'm going to do is stick the box over my head and then I'm going to click this little button to get it to play the timeline and track my head. So let's do that. There we are. You can see it's gone through and bunged on an awful lot of keyframes, but there we are. My head, it's followed it perfectly. No problem at all. If we watch the results out here on the program window, yeah, well, you've got a ginger guy with a beard, but I'm not entirely sure who he is. Obviously, to blot it out a bit more, I just come in here and click on the setup and maybe change what the mosaics are like and all that sort of stuff. Doesn't really matter what you do from there on. The tracking is the point, and the tracking has made that shape follow my head. Now I need to do the same with Ringo, who moves a bit more than me. Well, here's a problem. First of all, he starts off screen, so I can't start tracking there. So I'm going to move along a bit until he's on screen, say about there. Now looking at that, you'll notice that he's a bit blurred for a start, so it's going to be quite hard to track, and you'll notice when I do it in a second some of it goes wrong, but let's do it anyway. I'm going to start tracking from this point. Now first of all I've got a shape over his head, because I've got one for me, now I need one for him. So I'm going to click on the oval tool and draw a shape over him. Now down here in the keyframing area you can see shape 1, which is my head, but you can't see shape 2. So obviously all you've got to do is just move the slider down until you can find shape 2, which is Ringo's head. Now I've started in the middle, so I've got to track backwards a bit to go all the way back to the start of the clip, and then I've got to track forwards as he sits down. So let's do backwards first. So all I'm going to do is just click on this little arrow. Again, I can go one frame at a time, or I can just let it do the whole thing. So just let's click on that and let it do the whole thing. Very quick, it managed to follow his face off screen. Now it gets to the end and it says, okay, I can't follow anything anymore, and that's because his head's going off screen. That's what it actually means here. So all I do when I see that is I just click OK, move backwards a couple of frames and manually move the shape off. Then you can see the shape really does follow his head in. So that's fine. I've got the opening done now. Now let's do the end. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on the double triangle and get it to track forward. Going well and oh, gone wrong. We went through this very quickly, but if you have a look at it, it's going pretty well there, pretty well. Comes down and here it loses it. It's losing it because it's suddenly noticing the edge of the screen and it's getting confused about which bit it should be doing. This happens quite a lot when I'm tracking things. If it's pretty obvious what you're tracking, like this head against a white background, easy. But as soon as you get two things in the way, it goes wrong. Like that. But what I want to do now is just select all those tracking points right to the end and delete them. Now the next thing I need to do, you might notice that I have a lot of little dots have gone in here, which are the tracking points, but at the same time it's also put some other keyframes in. Basically it's done stuff on the transform, which is, you know, the up, down, left, right and the scale. And it's actually keyframed the scale and it's keyframed the position. Normally there's one right at the end. Now because I've deleted it, there isn't one right at the end, so I want to make sure I put one in here as well. So I'm just going to come here and click on the transform and put one in, just to make sure that that actually stays in that place. And then I'm going to move forward so Ring goes past the screen, move the shape over Ringo's head again, and then track forward a bit more. Yeah, it managed that, it's just the bit in the middle it didn't, so I had to delete what it did and then manually sort it out. Actually on the start here it was doing fine, but it didn't really get the scaling right. You know, it's got a bit smaller than it should have done. So I'm going to manually adjust that as well. Let's see, it's fine up to there. About there, I really could have done with this being a bit bigger and a bit more over his head. So all I did was come in and change it at that point, and then come to the end here and let's just make it a bit bigger and over his head again. And now you see I've got something that's pretty well tracked. So it did a fairly good job, but it lost it about here. To be honest, a lot of tracking things do that. I did a video on some of the new things in Premiere Pro recently, and I tracked exactly this shot using their mask tracker, and guess what? It also lost it when Ringo sat down and went past the screen, and I had to manually adjust it. But now having done that, if I click on OK, you can come and watch the thing, and you'll notice I've now successfully blocked Ringo out. Actually at the end there, probably gone off a little bit. It's over his head, it's just not enough over his nose, so obviously go back into it, go to the end, find shape 2, which is obviously Ringo's shape, and I'm just going to adjust that at the end so it's more over his nose. Now obviously I can change the filter that's inside of the mask, click on here and maybe select blur instead. I'm going to use the old Gaussian blur. Let's blur it quite a lot. Let's have a look at this screen, see what it's like. Yeah, that's not bad. Maybe I want to do a bit of a softer edge, so I'll click on soft and then take up the width. The soft edge goes on both sides of the circle, so it goes on the inside and the outside, and sometimes when I do a soft edge like that, it starts to show something inside the circle. So I come down to where it says side and say no, just do it outside, which means everything inside that shape is blurred and then it fades off into the distance. Now there we are, I've successfully blurred out my faces as opposed to mosaicked out the faces. And that's it, that's basically the motion tracker. You can use it on a mask. Here's another example. In this case I've done a mask which I've tracked around my face. So if we go into the mask filter, you can see I've just put an oval on there and I've got it to track it. This one was really easy. If I just delete the shape, put it back on, move it into the right place at the start, track, off it goes, and you can see that's actually keeping to my face very nicely. Now the reason I'm doing this in particular is because this shot is actually a little bit blurred. The focus wasn't quite right. Obviously you should film it again, but if that's not possible, maybe you can get away with it by sharpening it up a bit. But ideally I would just sharpen up me, I wouldn't sharpen up everything else, which is why I put a mask around my face. I've then put a sharpness filter inside the mask, stuck a big soft border on it, And so I've sharpened up me, but not sharpened up everything else. And the mask has nicely followed my face, so it doesn't have too much impact on the surroundings. Get out of this. And there you can see it playing back. Let's say the nice thing is that the sharpness is just on my face, which helps to make my face look a bit more defined, whilst at the same time not messing up the background. If I just turn a couple of things on here, you'll notice now I've got a before and after. So the one on top is the one with the sharpness on my face. The one on the bottom is the one with no sharpness. And if I play those back, you should be able to see that my head here, it looks like it's in focus. It's pretty well defined. The rest of the stuff around here hasn't changed, but my face looks better than it does on this side, which is how it's filmed. I added a 31% sharpening on that. If I go to the bottom shot, which has no effects on there, and put a 31 sharpness on it, and you look at that, you can see the reason I didn't want to add sharpness to everything is it suddenly does all this other stuff with all my boxes in the background and all the other things on the poster behind me. It works nicely if it's just constrained to the head, but having a bit of sharpness on there, it has a bad effect on these things. Which is why I like to put the sharpness just on my head, and the motion tracker lets me do that. Here's just another example of a bit of motion tracking and how I deal with the sort of problems I'd come up with here. So in this particular shot, you can see I've got a couple of cars, and I really don't want you to be able to read those number plates. Again, same as before. Drop a mask filter on, double click on it. I'm going to draw a little box around this number plate here. Stick a mosaic on that one. Actually, why don't we just stick a blur on that. Make sure it's nicely blurred, which it is. And then I'm going to just track that. So come down to the tracking, click on that and track it forward. Doing well, and yep, that one worked. Not a problem. So let's just move on a little bit more. Move that off screen. And yep, I've managed to track the first one. That was simple. Let's go for the second one. Now the second one is behind the car. So let's go to a point where I can actually see it. And go for shape 2 here and track that one forward and see what happens. So yeah, it's coping with it. Obviously lost it completely when it went behind the other car, but let's see what happens. That's actually doable. Maybe it gets a bit too small at the end there, but I definitely want it to have disappeared by here. I don't want it to carry on. So what I'm going to do is zoom all the way in and go for one frame after where I wanted it to disappear and then just whack it off screen. So what happens is it's there and then it's gone. And now I don't see it again. Okay, well that's the end of it sorted out. What about the start? Basically it's over the other car. So what I could do on that is I'm just going to go back to here and track it backwards and see what happens. And it's tracked it, it's got the position right, but the blur does go into the other car. At that point I'm quite happy with it. So let's stick a keyframe in there. So I'm happy with it there. I'm going to move back a bit. And what I want to do is I just want it to get a little bit thinner. Now if I go and grab the thing and try and shrink it, of course what's happening is it shrinks both sides. It makes the whole thing bigger or smaller. And I'm quite happy with the height. I just want to change the width. So all you've got to do is come over to here where you've got shape 2. Go to the scale settings and untick that fixed ratio thing. That locks them together. So if you make the X smaller, the Y gets smaller. Your Y is up and down, X is left and right. Now what I can do is make the whole thing a bit thinner, but the same height. Make sure it's still over the number plate, and then you can see it gets bigger as the car moves out of the way. Let's go to the start and set it for the start. And there we are, now it's got it getting a bit bigger. So same principle as before, let's track it and then fiddle. Again, I could do with putting a bit of a fuzzy edge on there because it looks a bit naff. And I could do it on the outside to make sure I don't bring in the number plate. But now you can see I've actually got a shot which has got both number plates blurred out. And pretty quickly. Let's take a quick look at this shot. So again, it's another piece of HDV footage. And I want to track this guy as he moves across the screen. Maybe this time I want to highlight him. So let's try doing that. I'm going to shove a mask effect on top of it. And let's go to where he's actually on screen so I can at least see him. And let's put a mask around him and try tracking it. And okay, it's lost it completely. The scale's gone completely bonkers. What if I turn off the scale? Try it again. Nope, lost it completely again. The problem is that as he moves across, he's nice and defined there, but it's getting rather confused between him and this stuff at the back. There's a whole variety of different colours here. Some of this looks a bit similar to him. It's just not following him very, very well. Could try making it smaller. Let's try following his trousers. Because if I could at least track it, I could adjust the size afterwards. But yeah, no, that's not working either. How about I try following the buggy instead? Oh, not doing too bad a job following the buggy. Although it's lost it there. Let's try just doing that again. Right, nearly. Where does it go wrong? It's gone wrong there. When it comes out the shadow, again, you can see it's having trouble going from tracking that shape against one background to another background. It's pretty normal for tracking. But there we are. Yep, that did it. And that's what I do if I can't get something to work. I'll actually come through and try tracking something else. Now, having done that, probably need to go back to the start as well. So let's go to where I started tracking and track backwards. Oh, that worked. Yeah, I've now got a track of that going across the screen. What I really wanted to do was do a shape that was over this guy, but at least I've tracked something. So I need to reposition this over the guy. Now, the obvious thing would just be to come in here and then grab hold of it and move it and put it over the top of him. But if you look at the position settings here, when I move it around, it adds in a keyframe. So okay, it's right there, but as soon as I get to this thing, it's moved back to the buggy. That's because when I was tracking, I had to move it around a little bit just to make sure it stayed on the buggy whilst it was tracking. If I come and just grab it and move it somewhere else, what happens is it's putting in a new keyframe, and actually I've got to go through all of these ones and grab it and move it over the top of the guy. Which is doable, it's just there's 5 or 6 of them. There's an easier way to sort that out. Let me just undo those last couple of things. And I'm back to where I had my nice track. And instead of adjusting the position, I'm going to adjust the anchor. Now the anchor is the point around which this thing would rotate if we rotated it. But it does have the rather nice thing that if I change the anchor, it'll actually move my mask somewhere else in the image. So even though I've tracked the buggy, it'll move it over the guy. I've only got 2 keyframes, one at the start and one at the end. And I'm going to get rid of both of those so there are no keyframes at all. I'm going to turn off keyframing. So now the anchor has got no keyframes on it at all. Now at the moment, everything else looks the same. But if I open up the anchor, you can see I've got an X and a Y position. And if I just change those numbers, so just stick your mouse over it and move the numbers. And I'm going to move it up in the Y. There we are. Now you can see what's happened is that mask, that oval mask, has actually moved over the guy, even though it tracked the buggy. And it's moved it over the guy all the way through. Now having done that, I just want to put some kind of effect on it, and I'm going to highlight this guy by darkening down everything else around it. Easiest way to do that is just to click on the outside of the mask and then drop the opacity. Of course, if I've dropped the opacity of it, it's only gone dark because there's only one clip. If there was another clip underneath it, I'd actually see the other clip. So if that was the case, you'd go to Filter, choose a filter, and I'd use this block color filter, which basically fills everything else up with a particular color. In this case, it's white, so I need to change it to black. And I'm going to turn the strength of it down, so it's just darkening it down. So most of the time, I actually just turn down the opacity because I don't have anything underneath it. But if you did have something underneath it, you would do that. I'm going to fuzz the edges up a bit because it makes it look a bit nicer. And now if I play that back, you can see I've got a nice highlight following the guy pushing the buggy. I've almost changed him into James Bond, but not quite. Now again, that wasn't too hard. Before I had a mask filter with tracking, I'd have just dumped it on there, stuck a mask around this guy, and I'd have just done it by turning on keyframing and putting in a start keyframe and an end keyframe, and seeing how well that followed him. Which actually in this case, because the guy keeps up a nice constant pace, works perfectly. On that shot, doing it the old-fashioned way and not tracking it is quicker. Can happen sometimes. You get the idea of the limitations of the tracker by doing a few tracks. A lot of times I do not track stuff because if it's just something like this and I'm not too worried if it's not 100% accurate, I don't need to track it, and just bunging in some of my own keyframes might be faster. I use tracking if I've got something that's moving around quite a lot, moving around at random. It's harder to do that manually. Something flying straight across the screen like this is dead easy. So it's a nice tool, but you don't use it for everything.